Welcome to That Pennsylvania Witch podcast. My name is Katelyn Dawn. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for tuning into That Pennsylvania Witch podcast. I have been on a journey lately interviewing authors and meeting some amazing human beings. Recently, I had the honor of speaking with Susan Harper. Susan is the author of Pagan Portal's book, Feminist Witchcraft, and she's an educator, an advocate, activist, writer, ritual specialist. Susan holds a PhD in Cultural Anthropology and an MA in Multicultural Women's and Gender Studies from Texas Women's University. Susan's been researching and writing about feminist witchcraft, goddess spirituality, and neo-paganism for more than 20 years. I'm excited to have her on today. Okay, you got to repeat that. You don't spew forth obscenities.
I don't spew forth obscenities. I enunciate them clearly like a fucking lady.
Susan, I'm so glad you could come on today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm glad to be here.
I really enjoyed getting to know you so far, and just your book was fantastic.
Thank you.
If you could remind me of the release date of your book, Feminist Witchcraft?
Yes. So my book, Feminist Witchcraft, through Moon Books. The official date is July 1, although people who pre-ordered are already sending me pictures of the book in the wild. So if you order it through, through Amazon is your place right now, but I'm working on getting it into some local bookstores. But if you have ordered it, it will be showing up sometime before July 1, and then it goes out to the rest of the world on July 1st.
Nice. Oh, I always like to support local and indie bookstores at any way possible, but
yes,
I also do recognize that sometimes Amazon is easier, so I try to offset it as much as I possibly can.
Absolutely. It's a balance. You know, I'm here in central Iowa in the US, and we have a really thriving independent bookstore culture. So I'm in the middle of chatting with several of them. I know one of our shops here in Des Moines will be, Wendy's Sublime Healing will be carrying copies because I'm going to do a signing there sometime in July. And a couple of shops out in New Mexico have let me know that they're going to be carrying. So that's just, keep an eye on the Instagram, which is The Dreaming Priestess. Anytime they're spotted in the wild, I'm going to let people know.
Nice. Absolutely. I will keep an eye on your Instagram. I hope nobody can hear my dogs losing their mind. They're losing their shit, if you will, in the background, because apparently we're having river stones and mulch delivered, which is the perfect time to do that, right? In the middle of a podcast. So thanks everybody for your patience. But if you can hear them, I apologize. I want to talk a little bit about you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a PhD? What's your PhD in?
My PhD is in Cultural Anthropology, and I actually did my dissertation between 2003 and 2005 on contemporary paganism in the U.S. South, specifically centered in Texas, which was a super interesting time to be talking to people. But it was my community that I'd been in, since I had started, and I found them interesting. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of academic literature, especially in the social sciences, on contemporary paganism. And I was like, well, I'm going to write the book I wish I could find. And now I've thought about going back and revisiting it to, 20 years later, update it, because some of the trends that I found are probably different. But it's, and that lens very much informs the way that I look at my craft and at pretty much everything in my life. Try to look for like the holistic, how it's all connected.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I think that looking at things from a holistic perspective is really, really fascinating.
Yes.
So when I was like a youngin', my sister was an anthropology major, and I was just a huge nerd. So she's 12 years older than me, my sister that's closest to age. And I would watch all of her. And so this was the 80s, okay?
Yeah.
So we had VHS tapes, horribly recorded VHS tapes, because those old academic, I'm sure you've watched many of them.
So bad.
They're so bad. But yeah, I grew up learning about that and with that medium, from that medium. So
I love
I was
that.
very excited to see that that was what you had your PhD in, and that's what you study. And that is the lens that you view everything through.
Yeah, it really so my father had thwarted dreams of being an Egyptologist. So he started me early in with archaeology. And then I sort of realized there was this whole other side to things. I went to college with the intention of becoming a high school Shakespeare teacher and moving back to South Dakota and marrying my on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again high school boyfriend. My wife loves when I tell that story. And then I wandered into my first anthropology class to fulfill a social science credit, and I was hooked. In an alternate universe out there, there's a Susan that is teaching Shakespeare and, raised a bunch of half Czech, half Norwegian kids, and she probably had a great life. But this has been a big adventure, and it's led me to do all kinds of things that I never even knew people did, including writing books about witchcraft, which who knew?
Well, I'm really glad that you took that class and that was the catalyst for this, kind of redirect because
Yes,
your book is fantastic. Your
thank you.
perspective is amazing and fresh. I have to say, I know so many anthropologists that are pagan or that
Yep,
label themselves as pagan. And I kind of
yep,
joke that, like, so rocks and meditation or plants, those are the gateway drugs to
yep,
paganism
yep.
or animism in general.
Yeah,
So,
there's a lot of pagan leaning folks in anthropology, and there's a whole lot of Unitarian Universalists, and some of us are both.
yes.
We're pagan by practice and UU by community.
Are
Um,
you a UU member?
I am here in Ames, Iowa.
I am also here in York, Pennsylvania.
I
So,
love it. I love it.
yeah,
I think, especially at this point in our political reality, something about going into a place where people don't necessarily share theology, but they share values and moral beliefs
yes,
is hugely important because you know, certainly I talk about it a little bit in the book, some of the things that happen in goddess-centered witchcraft spaces. I share theology with those people, but we do not share the same values at
absolutely.
all. And it's been really, since we moved here, we've been in Iowa, my wife and I, about almost 3 years. And the community here has been really great. The fact that our minister does things occasionally like call the directions during service also really help. She's got that background, but it's a place to really ground a lot of our my political work in a larger context.
Oh, absolutely. I really
Love it.
like the UU, the values. I really like
Yes.
that a bunch of, basically in our area, there are a bunch of extremely accepting people that will let
Yeah.
me ramble to we have a group, a Earth-centered group
Mhm.
that gathers like once a month and for, Sabbats
Yeah,
and
we
that sort
do.
of thing. And we don't share one single belief system, but just animism in general.
Yep.
So we kind of take turns presenting. I've been helping to
Right.
run that, and it's just such a wonderful group of people sharing values or having similar values right now helps me feel safe, you know?
Yes. Yes. It's, to walk in and I mean, in some ways, it's like, well, walk into a room and know that everybody agrees that everybody's human. I mean, that should be the floor, right?
That,
But
yeah.
I mean, don't trip over that low bar you just set for yourself. But we are where we are,
Yes.
as a country, and the community is the only thing that saves us. As a queer person, I'm like, community is the only thing that saves us. Like we say all the time, we're like, we take care of us because
Yeah.
nobody else is going to do it. We take care of us. And, you got to spread that, open that tent wide to
Yeah.
bring as many people who believe in love and justice and what the Unitarian Universalist Association calls jet pig. Uh,
Yeah.
justice, was it justice, equity?
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna get an F. I just joined
I
this year.
know.
Do I get a pass?
Yeah, I just joined this
Um,
year too.
did you
Uh,
really? How
yep.
interesting.
Yep. I've been in and out of Unitarian Universalist congregations because I lived in Texas. And when you're in Texas, you better have an answer when people say, "Have you found your church home yet?" So most, well, I shouldn't say most, but many people that practice some form of contemporary paganism also find their home in Unitarian churches for, various reasons. And we had like 11 of them in Dallas Fort Worth, so you could kind of do the tour and never be bored.
Nice. I just dig it. I dig community. I dig inclusion.
Yeah,
And that's reading your book. I love the beginning of it when you talk about your first experience, basically going into a group setting.
yeah,
Um, it just rang so true to my own experience. It just, hit me with a wave of nostalgia. I think people think of pagan practitioners as these unapproachable, mystical beings. And okay, heck yeah, right? I will wear
sure.
that hat. But a lot of times we practice in people's backyards, people's
Yes,
living rooms. You said it's a potluck. We do a potluck. We're having a potluck tomorrow
always.
for solstice,
Of course.
And it's people gathering in circles.
Yes,
It
yes,
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where.
yeah.
But I really loved your story because that was how I started. Just a few years after
Yeah.
you, really. And do you still interact with those people?
Some of them, yes. The friend that I went to that circle with, she gave me my first books on witchcraft. She was my best friend for 30 years and she passed away last fall.
I'm so sorry.
But we had so many adventures together as like young, like 19, 20, 21-year-old witches in Texas in the early 90s, like driving out to these little small towns and we're like, well, I hear there's a full moon ritual around here somewhere. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah,
Um,
there's no finding it,
no.
Every once in a while you'll see like one of those garden flags and you're like, "Oh, that's
Oh,
a
oh,
Triskeli. All right,
there
I
we
think
are.
we're in the
There we
right
are.
spot." Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and in Texas, because of the Lone Star, everybody's got a pentagram on their door.
That's
So,
that's true, but also here in Pennsylvania, they have the hexcraft,
yes,
what are they called? The hex
the
signs.
hex signs. Yeah.
So of course there's a lot of stars on
Yeah.
our
Like,
barns, and we even have something
okay.
called a star. Well, we did. I think they took it down, but yeah, I think you can't talk about your journey without talking about how it started.
Yeah,
And
you
I like
can't.
that. I like that you started your book like that. It was one of the
Yeah,
many things I liked about it. So,
I tell that story a lot. And because it made such a profound impact on me. Because I'd been in some like more traditional Wiccan rituals and that lovely, right?
sure.
But this was just so transformative at that, especially at that point in my life and who I was as this, 19-year-old girl who was just trying to figure stuff out, and who, wandered into this community of women who were, you know, doing really deep work, who were, really kind of laying the ways in which patriarchy had hurt them really bare, um, at a time where I needed to do that work. I had things that I had kind of like pushed back in my small town life and,
Hmm.
because you just get through it. And then I moved almost 1,000 miles from home, which is, of course, profoundly destabilizing, and was in school and being exposed to different ideas and different people and figuring out I was queer and like all of it. And to be able to do that work in like with people who had created a container for that and could give me some guidance. I always want books. I'm like, give me things to read.
Oh yeah.
And they were willing to do that and were willing to answer all my questions and, kind of stepped in and were that like auntie network that I think a lot of us need. I learned a lot from them and not just about witchcraft. The book was already in press, otherwise I would have put this in the front piece, but I speak at a interfaith pride service here in Ames. It's been the last couple of years. And last year I actually wrote a piece because so much of that service is about queer folks having had really damaging religious experiences. And I like to talk about the fact that I figured out I was queer about the time I wandered into paganism, which, at least the kind that I wandered into, was unequivocally queer affirming. Like I didn't have to deconstruct all that. And so the piece I wrote was is called "Everything I Know About God I Learned from Queer Women," and it just was a chance to reflect on it, yeah, on that same day, and just like what I learned from these women just living their just honest lives. And I always say I don't know who I don't know who I would be if I hadn't gone to that particular equinox ritual in that little house on Austin Street in Denton, Texas. I have no idea who I would be at this point in my life. But I definitely date my life from before and after that day.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I would love to hear that sometime if you have that in a resource that's available.
I do.
I would love to hear it. Hey,
We
that
can
sounds
we can
great.
finish the episode with it if you want.
That would be delightful. Yeah, so I have a multifaceted kind of upbringing, but it's similar to yours in that I stumbled into and I was
Right,
solitary
I
for
hear
quite a
that.
long time. But we really do we form these perspectives, and I think that when you start on the pagan path, especially if you're coming from a place of, our patriarchal society, because we do live in
Yeah,
one capitalistic,
yeah.
imperialistic, patriarchal society,
100%.
you almost go through this deprogramming. And it's so important to kind of unpack, oh, well, where did that come from?
Yes.
I mean, it's carved over the temple of Apollo, right? Know
Yeah,
thyself.
know
Like, how are
thyself.
you, you have to know who you are and what's important to you, and how can you separate that from your craft?
I don't think you can. I quote her in the book that one of my first people I learned with, I was never in a formal student relationship with her because that's not how she rolled. And it's not how I roll. But I learned a lot from her. And she said, the first year is going to be all about facing your shit. Like you're going to have to face so much stuff about yourself just to even be able to start on this path. And she's right. I had to go into therapy and all of those things because starting to do that like deep work, um, one, it makes you kind of face, even though I didn't grow up in a family that was particularly religious, our religious upbringing, it was complicated and weird. My mom was, as she put it, a recovered Catholic who became Church of Christ in her 20s. My dad was a reverent atheist who was raised by an atheist and a Jehovah's Witness.
Wow.
So yeah, and my grandmother was my Jehovah's Witness grandmother. There's a prophecy that if you were, I think it's either alive in or born in 1917, that you're anointed and that you'll never die. You'll just go straight to heaven. And my grandmother was born in 1917, or was alive in 1917. So she thought that like she was a big deal in her communities. Um, and we weren't particularly observant in my mother's religion, but that stuff really gets into you, right? And so when I started doing a lot of the self work in witchcraft, and particularly because I was working within this kind of goddess centered feminist tradition, which is very much about healing the wounds of patriarchy, some of it was realizing how deep those messages had gotten into me and having to root them out. At the time, I didn't necessarily have anything to replace them with. And so it's this feeling like it can feel like your whole world just collapses. And like, well, okay, all these things that I didn't even consciously think were true, now I'm conscious of them and they're not true. And my culture doesn't offer me an alternative. So how do I build this? I was in community, so I had examples, but it was facing a lot of things about myself. And I think the biggest thing, and I still have to check it because it goes deep, like working in a circle that puts feminism at the center will make you check your internalized misogyny all day.
And we all have it.
We
We all
all
have
have
those
it.
things to unpack.
We all
Wow.
have it. And all the messages I had gotten about competing with other women, about it wasn't exposed a lot to purity culture, but I was on the edge of that about like, morality and women as the gatekeepers of sexuality and all these things that if you had asked me, I don't believe that. That's crap. But it was in there. The whole thing is like there was somebody I worked with who said, the point is not to just unconditionally love other women because that's not easy. That's not possible. But what you do is in sort of the kind of political feminism that she was talking about, she's like, we just stop centering men and men's experiences. And that we center our experiences instead. And that was like, oh, every time I said, oh, I'm a feminist, but I don't hate men, I'm like, I just made that about dudes. I didn't make it. And not to mention men can be feminists too, but,
Sure.
but in those spaces where, we live in a culture that has a vested interest in keeping women and I would argue other folks of genders that are not cisgendered men,
Yes.
but especially women, cis, trans, or otherwise, they have a vested interest in keeping us competing with each other and in nitpicking ourselves. Yeah, the longer I've been within this paradigm, like it's like, oh, we got to deconstruct diet culture.
Oh, yeah.
We got to deconstruct slut shaming.
Yep.
We have to deconstruct all of this. And, so you don't have to have a women's studies degree to practice feminist craft, but I'm not going to lie, it helps. And especially like now in this time where people are wanting to take those things out of the university and like they blaming the collapse of Western civilization on women's studies majors with pronouns.
Sorry.
To, I
Yeah.
mean, I tell
Yeah.
you, it's
Yep.
it's our problem. What does one of my students say? Every time they get mad, we just make up another gender.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, yes, let's do that. To like be able to have those conversations and, have people not feel like they have to apologize for having them is
Yeah.
so huge. But that's, I'm taking the long way around the barn here, but it's such a process.
It is.
Um, and I know my friend who's basically my little sister back in Texas, we are lefty socialist witches, feminist witches. And we always say that, like, if given a choice when we're thinking about who we want to practice with, because if you don't feel like you don't have the analysis, you don't have to have read everything ever written or there's no entrance exam, but at least the beginning of an analysis that looks at the world through sort of this lens of equity and this lens of connectedness. I think the journey into doing this work can be kind of hard.
Oh, it
Um,
can be hard. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I was just at a conference and the person opened it saying, "Well, we're all pagan, so we haven't had an easy go of it."
I mean, yeah.
I think that all of the common denominator with all of those things that you mentioned is shame. We
Yes.
use shame to control, and
Yes.
you really have to dig deep to find it sometimes because it's like,
Yes.
where did this come from?
Yes.
And 9 times out of 10, it's the shame. You get to the bottom of it, like, oh, where did I get this need to compete with
Yes.
people and to impress the person in charge or without actually listening to people and enjoying their company and celebrating all that they have to offer, why do
Yes.
I always feel the need to kind of jump in and improve myself? Where does that
Yes.
come from? Well, that
Yes.
comes from the shame that's perpetuated in these systems.
Absolutely. And so often it's not necessarily that somebody sat you down
Mm.
and said these things to you,
Yep.
but you've absorbed it. So you absorb, people pleasing, or you absorb that you only get love through achieving, which means you have to be the smartest person in the room ever. Hello, traumatized former gifted kid
Yeah. Oh,
here.
hi. Waving back at
Yeah,
you
yeah.
there.
Hi. There's a lot of us. I joke with my wife that next year for Halloween, I'm just going to put on regular clothes and go as a former gifted kid. And so when people ask me, what are you supposed to be? I just go, man, I was supposed to be a lot of things, and then walk away.
So many things.
But yeah, there's and really to pull apart that, guilt is feeling bad for something you do, and shame is feeling bad for something you are. And to pull those apart, I think is difficult because we often, shame is used as a punishment when we do something that's wrong. We're then told we should feel bad about what we are. And within at least the way I feel about witchcraft, there's the holding of two truths that we are perfect exactly as we are in any given moment, semicolon and comma, we are always growing. I would say the only person that I've had to learn, and it's hard for me because I'm an achiever, I really try to take the standpoint that the only person I'm in competition with is the person I was yesterday.
Yes.
And how can I, you know, I don't even like the word better. How can I be more expansive? How can I experience life more fully and
Yeah,
with more
that's beautiful.
compassion? Thank you. With like compassion and gentleness and with I mean like the Unitarian Universalists say, like with love always at the center.
Mm.
And knowing that that sounds sort of really pretty, but that's hard
Oh, it's
because
so hard.
it's so hard and it's so worth it because that's where I think that's where the alchemy happens is that there's so much that's transformed by love. We just have to have a very, I think, expansive idea of what love is, and that sometimes love is doing the really hard thing. It's not always going to be let's all just hug it out. Like love can be doing the hardest thing and sometimes feeling like you're going to die with it, but knowing that you're going to survive on the other side and
Yes.
trying to keep that central. It is so hard. And I think about like all the times I've gotten kind of bruised and battered by it, but man, it is better than the alternative.
Oh, it is because I have a very good friend, and she actually has a wonderful podcast called The Plant Witch. If you've never listened to it, I
Ooh,
fully
adding
recommend
to
Plant
the
Witch
playlist
podcast.
right now. Okay.
Um, but she always says that it is kinder to growl. It is kinder to when someone pushes up against your boundaries or when someone crosses a line with you. Is it better to stew about it and go away and come, because that's what we've been trained to do.
Yes.
Be quiet, keep sweet. There's a million different ways to say that. And then really we're perpetuating this. And
Yes.
someone might not even know they've upset you. They might
No.
not even understand your own perspective and you weren't brave enough to speak it at that
Yes.
time. Like I always
Yes.
say, I will defend my beliefs in public, but also in private.
Mhm.
If I'm with someone who has a perspective that I consider problematic, I unpack it with them.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's hard.
It's so hard.
It
It's
is.
so
And
hard.
most of the time, and I'll be honest, I'd say more than half of the time, which I think is a big piece of that, they'll unpack it and recognize that we have way more in common and we
Yeah.
both leave the conversation changed.
Yes.
And that's holding
Absolutely.
that center of love. It is hard. Oh my gosh, is it hard? Whew.
Oh, it's so much easier just to either walk away or have a fight,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And I know something that I learned from one of my late mentors. I miss you, Colleen. We're in a reclaiming community up kind of in the northern Midwest. And I met them through anti-racist organizing, which, I'm a white woman, on the other side of 50. So I could have grown up to be a prime Karen. And I'm lucky that there are people who intervened before that happened.
Yes.
And Colleen was one of those people. And something that they said to me once when I had to accept some hard feedback was, we correct you because we love you and because we believe that you can be better than you were in that moment. And Colleen was also a white person, as far as I know their heritage. I had been in these circles, and she's just like, Susan, Black and brown and indigenous women are tired. If they thought you were a lost cause and a waste of time, they would just chalk you up that you were just another one and walk away. These women believe, and I believe you can be better, and that we try to always take feedback as an act of love. And like, that's another moment where I date my life from before and after it because it was such a paradigm shift. And I hear Colleen's voice in my head anytime I get defensive at the face of, okay, people are, and that's what I tell people too. Like if I call you on something, if I ask you, to talk and if I need you to come correct about something, it's because I believe you can. And I want to continue to have you in my life
Yes.
and we need to talk about it.
Yes. And that is love
That
because
is love.
that's how you bridge that gap.
Yep.
I love
Yeah.
that. Your introduction. So rewind a little bit,
Yeah.
but your introduction about witchcraft has always been political. And yes, yes, yes,
Yes.
yes. It has been. If it
Yes.
weren't for Gardner and oh my gosh, so many mentors. My one of my mentors is Silver Ravenwolf.
No,
If it wasn't
yes.
for, our ancestors in this neo-pagan belief system
Uh-huh.
hodgepodge, there's dozens of them. If it weren't for them, and in some ways they're imperfect perspectives, I'm not looking at Gardner
Absolutely.
directly, but like just a little bit, just
Maybe
saying.
to the side. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit. We talked about how their beliefs they were controversial at the time.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
they paved the way for us to be our own true selves. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think it's important.
No, it is. And I think, it's sort of interesting, like, here in the US, I think some people, it's changing now. But when you say politics, they think you mean elections,
Yes.
which is part of it. Yes. But the idea of, I talk about it in the book, people are like, well, I don't like to mix my politics with religion. And I'm like, I got bad news for you, my friend. I got bad news for you. Because you may not want to, but that's kind of not how that
Yeah.
works. And even sort of expanding beyond even, neo-pagan, contemporary pagan witchcraft. Any witchcraft is something that exists cross-culturally in a lot of different forms. A lot of it doesn't look like, what I do or what you do,
Yeah.
but the concept is there, and it is always about power.
It
It's
is.
whether it's about claiming power or somebody attributing power to you, it is about power. And to take the label on and not understand that there is power in it is, I think, to like fundamentally misunderstand.
Oh,
Um,
for sure. For sure. And yes, you said to claim the label of witch is to claim power. Yes. And not
yes.
only that, I mean, if you can't abandon the interconnectedness of all things.
No, no,
You
you
can't
can't.
abandon that in your pursuit of power or your pursuit to
No.
plug into this system, this web of power.
Yes, it's all connected. And, even like, because I'm a social scientist and I go back to this sort of witchcraft craze in Europe in the kind of pre-Renaissance and even a little bit post. And while we know that most of the people that were executed were not witches, and if they were practicing witchcraft, it wasn't what we do. There weren't 9 million of them. There's lots of misunderstanding.
Yes.
We also know that next to the Holocaust, the European witch trials are the most documented event in human history because everything was records. Everything was records. And they were these events that fundamentally shaped European society after European society had been, I'm talking in broad brush here because we'd be here all day otherwise, but had been reshaped by the Black Death.
Hmm.
And suddenly you have all these women that have money and property because all the men in their families are dead in a society that doesn't have a place for women that are independently wealthy. Because women that are wealthy independently, they're not going to get married and give all that over to some guy,
Yes.
right? And women were more often likely to survive the plague because we did the nursing. And so you've got to have some way to like bring these women under control. And how can you prove you didn't do witchcraft? You can't,
Mhm.
for the same reason that they accuse men of, I mean, men were accused of witchcraft, but for the same reason that men are accused of sodomy. How can you prove you didn't do it?
Yeah.
And the minute you're accused, everything is either forfeit to the government or forfeit to the church.
Yeah.
And on the off chance that you survive, you have nothing. And so, even though the these people that were accused were probably not doing much beyond like herbal cures and midwifery, even to have that label is to ascribe like profound power, like the power to destabilize all of society.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's still part of the legacy. And the fact that witch is a word that's been used to hurt women and queer people disproportionately and been used to hurt us in ways that disempower us. I think it's very important for those of us who resonate with that word to claim it. You don't have to claim it if it's not your word. It's okay. But if you feel drawn to that word, it is your word.
Yeah.
And it is putting on a mantle of power, and it's putting on a mantle of great responsibility, to Star Wars it a little bit. But um
Yeah, I think that using this in a way to start recovering from that damage.
yeah.
And really, self-empowerment is how we will collectively recover.
Yes.
And bring it back to Hermeticism because it always goes back to
It always
Hermeticism.
goes back there. It always goes back there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's sort of one of those things. I'm doing some writing in my like scholarly life right now about the way in which and I watched it happen after 2016, after the first Trump election.
Hmm.
Um, there was this resurgence of very public interest in witchcraft, right? Which was amazing to watch. And then over the last, 8 years, capitalism got a hold of it in a whole new way.
Oh, yeah.
And it's gone through this process of, for my Marxists out there, it's gone through the process of capitalist recuperation, to where it's pretty and it's all about wellness. And like, I love me some wellness
Sure. Mindfulness.
and love
Yeah.
it. Great. Self-empowerment is so cool. And for sort of the way that it's presented out there in a lot of like the market, it's like, and self-empowerment is where it stops. It's like, no, we empower ourselves so we can empower each other, so that we can then build collective power and collective agency and collective efficacy. And, that looks different in a lot of ways, but that is the only way, by finding our own power, and then, we help the other people around us do it. And then we build that together. That's where, yeah, I absolutely believe like witches were born for this moment right
Mm.
now. We were
Yes.
born for it. Um, but we have to remember, like, it's great to be self-actualized and moisturized and hydrated and all those things. But we need to then take that out kind of to the world, and to our communities, to how, wherever your sphere is, because the world needs more people that are in the process of healing and taking their
Yeah.
power back.
And being honest about it.
It's
Being
about it.
honest that we all have mistakes. We all have been fooled by individuals. We all have been fooled by a news source,
Yes.
riled up about something and then recognizing, that wasn't really true to who I am.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that it's just a constant cycle. It's this spiral. Every time you go through it, you come to a higher understanding. Well, we were talking
Absolutely.
earlier, before I hit record, of course, right? But we were talking earlier about how many things can be true at once, and
Yes.
we were talking about how some of our beliefs were formed off of, the findings and the writings of people that we don't necessarily agree with or completely agree
Yes.
with, and how
Yes.
it can be really easy to abandon the whole production or the whole book or the
Mhm.
whole
Oh, yes.
system, but it's still part of who we are. I'm not saying to
It
be an
is.
apologist,
No.
not in any way, shape, or form, but I think that goes right into what you were saying with stepping into your power to repoliticize your own practice, whatever that
Yes.
is, whether it's witchcraft or just your own gnosis. Um,
Yes.
because you should be sinking into your own values and what's important to you.
Yes. Yes. And I think, one of the things, and I kind of love that it's made its way out into the more like secular, like, not really self-help, but like, it's kind of witchcraft light. Like, I've seen like Danielle Laporte and several of people in that kind of world,
Sure.
the kind of life coaching world, do a lot of talking about core desired feelings and values. And I do these exercises with my students at the university all the time, right? But I learned how to do that work through witchcraft, because that's also, a huge part of, when I think, especially when you don't necessarily have a book or religious authority who's going to give you a North Star for your values or your morals, um, you get to figure those out for yourself.
Yes. Yes.
And
That's exactly it.
I love it, it's because I know there are people like, well, if you don't have a sacred book, like how do you know what's right and wrong? And I'm like, well, I'm a human.
And that's
Like,
it.
you
Every
know,
mentor that I've ever had has either been they've been beneficial in different ways, but the
yeah.
most beneficial ones were the ones that don't try to push their own beliefs onto
Mhm.
you. They encourage
Mhm.
you to really sink into what's important to you
Yes.
and to then go from there.
Yes.
That's empowerment.
Yes. One of my favorite definitions of what a witch is actually comes, I will not surprise you, from Starhawk,
Yes.
wherein it was a interview in some documentary that I saw her in, where they asked her, what is a witch? And she said, a witch is somebody who's paying attention. And I love that so much, just like the call to just pay exquisite attention to the world around you, to the world within you, to how you move and act in that world. And that has made me think, over the last, gosh, almost, well, 30 years now, because I just turned 50, about how paying attention in the world and paying attention to myself has made me get really clear on what my values are and how to live in alignment with them. And that's not always easy. The world will inflict so much moral injury on you. But being willing to being able to hold on to myself in those moments. And I consider that witchcraft just as much as anything I do in a circle or with a candle.
Yeah.
It's that I walk through this world and I walk through the world and I pay attention and try to respond from the the places of my values and try to, always with love at the center. And that's sort of I think it's like the everyday magic that we're
Yeah.
doing all the time. When we choose to live, I mean, the phrase live authentically, you can get it embroidered on a pillow at Target now, so it's kind of lost some of its meaning, but it really is, to figure out what is capital T true for you
Yep.
and try to live that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And while I will never apologize for someone, you know, oppressing or harming others,
Mhm.
I will I will applaud people for being their own true selves outside of that sphere, you know? So
Yep.
if you have a belief that I don't necessarily I hold myself, I recognize and acknowledge your own belief. You have
Yep.
the ability to do that. But
Yes.
you also say that witchcraft is a tool for healing and growth and resistance. And
Yes.
heck yeah,
Yes.
absolutely it
Yes.
is.
And that's been, I know we chatted a little bit about this before we started recording, but, part of why I wanted to write this book was I wanted the book that I wish I had had at 20.
Yeah.
And, over the 3 decades I've been practicing, it happening against all these important cultural moments. So, I think about when I first came in to the craft, we were going through what I call the Oprah revolution, um,
Yep.
where, she had talked about being sexually abused. And because she would have that conversation in the middle of everybody's living room, we were talking about these things. We were talking about the damage of compulsory heterosexuality. We were talking about all these things, and a lot of those things feel pretty mainstream now, but in the 90s they were super revolutionary. And over the time I've also watched our discussion about gender just expand in a whole new way. Like, I didn't know that you could talk about people that were something other than women or men.
Mm.
When I started this path, I had no idea that your reproductive organs don't determine your gender. I know those things now. I have degrees in those things.
Yeah.
But I've had to watch, so I didn't have to. I have gotten the opportunity to watch those conversations unfold in our culture with all the tension around them, and to watch them unfold within, kind of goddess craft or feminist craft circles, and have had to like really wrestle. Like when I realized, because they say it like 10 toes down with their big lady voices,
Yep.
that some of the people whose writings literally saved my life were trans exclusionary and were so ugly
Yes.
about it.
Cool.
I mean, it wouldn't have been nice if they'd have been nice and polite either, but they were so ugly. And I had to wrestle with like, do I keep these books on my shelf? Well, they still mean what they meant to me. How, but how do I wrestle with this? And also, how do I talk about this?
Yeah.
Because, you know, when I started wanting to do sort of workshops and public events, and I would, you know, I'm doing a women's circle, there were assumptions that went with that. I know there are people that didn't come to my first few events because they assumed, and out of self-protection probably, that it was going to be a space that was not welcoming to them as trans and non-binary people. And you know, I had to figure like, how do I talk about this without just throwing somebody like under the bus and like, let's just have a trash session about this author, but also not apologizing. Um, you know, and how to hold people accountable, and you know, take what was transformative in their work and move it forward. And that's just such an ongoing conversation now. I'm so excited when I go to conferences and festivals where there are workshops where there's so much more discussion
Yes,
about.
people want to learn. I have found that even people who are so averse to certain things, because it's based out of fear and
Yes.
shame. They're not necessarily, now some of them are, I'm not being an apologist. Some people are being nasty, but some people have a very big fear and they want to learn. They don't have the language. They
Yep.
don't have the ability. Maybe they're from a different time, maybe they were raised differently than me, whatever the reason, they don't have the ability or the vocabulary to talk about it, and they're afraid to.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a lot of. So one of the first things that I sort of published out in the Pagan Press was in a co-edited volume. Lee Harrington was one of the editors, called Queer Magic, and I worked with the trans and non-binary folks in my circles to come up with a like, okay, as a cis facilitator, here's how you could do better, you know. And I wrestled whether that was my story to tell, because I didn't want to appear to be talking for trans folks, but what the folks in my circle, and thank you to Morgan and Bobby and Harper and all those people, they were like, no, you got to go get your people. Like this is this is a cis people problem. And I was like, all right, well, let's go. So I published, you know, a bit about the things that I had learned that had worked well, that my circle had helped me learn, and changes they'd helped me make. And I gave a presentation at Paganicon in like 2017 or 2018. And the room was packed, because there were people who were like, I hadn't really thought about this until like one of my circle mates came out as trans, or, you know, somebody asked me about this author and I didn't know, or I saw the thing that happened with that, with one of the, you know, these two very prominent feminist witchcraft practitioners who had at a public event like excluded trans women from the women's ritual. And they were like, so many people were like, I didn't even know this was a thing. And I don't understand why it's a thing. And I want to do better. And I do not know how.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Or they have a family member who's
yeah.
transitioning and it's upheaving like their entire personal belief. There are so many people that just want to learn.
Yes. Yes. And
Yeah.
it's like, I always feel like it's really important. And I'm trying to remember who I got this term from. And I'm sorry, I can't cite it, but to make a distinction, between like TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminists,
Mhm.
um, and what, uh, I refer to in some of my writing as TUMF, which is trans unaware mainstream feminists,
I love that.
um, who just like, they don't hold any animus. They have, you know, probably as much internalized transphobia as any cis person does. But the idea that you would exclude somebody from ritual space based on their gender, their genitalia, anything is so foreign to them
Yep.
that they haven't thought about why people do it and why people are therefore understandably hesitant about moving into spaces where, they're like, the chances that I could experience some sort of, at the very least, like verbal violence is high, right? And having to really like wrestle with, our imperfect ancestors. And then there are the women whose writing I read, who who passed away, who
Yeah.
never said anything trans antagonistic or otherwise sort of bigoted in their writing, but they're not alive now to tell me how they would think now,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
have you noticed? Did you read the different editions of Starhawk's Spiral Dance like I
yes,
did?
yes,
I bought it probably every time it came out, a new
yep,
version, because that's what your perspective evolves.
yeah,
And
it has to.
it has to. You have to come to a higher understanding. Even if you still make the wrong decision to be hateful, you have to at least have some sort of a higher understanding.
Yes, yeah, like
Yeah.
you can't stay stuck.
No.
It's and I feel like because I have been lucky enough to spend so much time in graduate school studying the things that I love. My doctorate in anthropology, I did my work in the American South on pagans. I have gotten to study and think about these things at a very deep and detailed level that most people that are out there trying to survive capitalism don't get to do. And that has been an incredible gift. And to me, that means that it is my responsibility to go out and not like tell people that they're wrong, but like I got to think about this in a really deep way. So let me tell you what that was like for me.
Yeah.
And let me share this with you. And then if you want to also go deeply down a rabbit hole, I'll give you a map. Um, but if spending 10 years in the theology library does not sound like something you want to do, here's some things I took away. And take those and use those in your life or don't. I always say in my workshops, take the meat and leave the bones. And if you're vegan, take the tofu and leave the packaging.
I saw
Um,
that in there too. That was
yeah.
great.
Because there's a lot out there, and to continue to grow, you need to always be encountering things that are new. And I always am. I learned so much from, I work for college students, and learned so much from my 18, 19, 20 year olds that's probably one of the things that's kept my worldview flexible
Sure.
is that, they're, especially working with queer kids. Actually, they're not kids,
Mhm.
they're young adults. Sorry, guys. That have just such a different understanding about how the human species is arranged. Um, and it has meant to be able to like serve those students. I've had to pay attention and think more flexibly. And that has definitely, it informs my craft informs my work, because of that need to start how it calls it the web, see where it's all
Mm.
connected, and to also be willing to, look at something and be like, oh, that, okay, I don't think I believe that anymore. And to change your mind in the face of new information. I was brought up that was actually a good thing, but we've now, I guess, elevated that to the level of a character flaw
It's
in our
been
culture.
it's been an interesting decade, hasn't it?
It has. It
Um,
has.
the vilification and the distrust of academia and the distrust of science.
Yep.
It's become very pervasive and very harmful
Mhm.
collectively.
Yes.
Now, I absolutely think that, I look at everything from a holistic perspective. So when I say that, I don't necessarily go and immediately get a new prescription medication for an ailment. If I can use peppermint oil to cure my migraine, and this is not medical advice, y'all,
No.
but like if
I'm
I
a
can
doctor,
use,
but not that kind.
yeah, like if I can use something to help that isn't going to be a complete upheaval of my endocrine system, I'm on board. But I'm also going to listen to my doctor. I'm also going to make sure that I align with the professionals that I'm getting advice from. But that's what we do. Like we take all of that and we look at
Yes.
it from a holistic perspective and we do what we can.
Yes. Well, and the undermining of science and anti-intellectualism are they're one of the first three pillars of fascism.
They
Like
are.
you find it everywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm writing about that in another pretty non-witchy context right now about a lot of the things that we're seeing happening. I'm writing about anti-DEI legislation in particular because I was impacted by that we wouldn't be at this moment where we're having all this contraction of initiatives and support if there hadn't already been planted a deep distrust
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
what was happening. And I'm just like, like they say that, well, first of all, the university has a liberal bent because it teaches critical thinking. So that's a thing. And also, if I could indoctrinate your students, they would read my syllabus.
I think anybody who can teach, even if they have differing opinions, can lament about that.
Right. Like no, they would read what I assign them. So
Yeah.
if I am indoctrinating your students, I'm doing a terrible job. So like maybe we can do something a little different with that.
That's the thing about empowerment and critical
Yeah.
thinking
Yep.
and giving people the tools they need to use deductive reasoning.
Yes.
Because
I
if we don't teach them to question, then we're not doing our
yeah.
jobs. Even as an educator yourself, I'm sure that you can,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I believe I separate sort of the act of education from educational institutions because those are only one place to learn. But like education is the key to freedom. Like however you get it, like and beyond freedom, it's the key to liberation. Um, we if we're all gonna and I define liberation as a situation in which everyone can thrive in their full humanity. And like we don't get there if we don't keep learning. And we can learn in all kinds of settings, but that's the key. And I'm like, I was telling somebody in an interview I did the other day that what it meant for me to be a witch at 19 and what it means for me at 50 are in some ways very different. The core is the same, but in some ways it means some things that are very different, and that is a good thing. I would not want to be stuck in my 19-year-old mindset, even though that was incredibly liberating. And the things I believed at 19 and the things I believed at 17 were pretty different. But I have continued to like learn and grow and have experiences. And, I plan to be around for a while again. I'm going to be a cranky, purple haired old lady in my 90s.
Yes.
And, I'm going to be different then too. And it's, always taking in like new information and new experiences and finding there's always something to learn.
Yes, and something to unpack. My
Yes.
wisest mentors are the ones that are perpetual scholars. I always call myself a perpetual scholar, self-taught. I'm actually trying to finish my degree right now, but I'm
Excellent.
tediously drudging through it. So, everybody has
Yes.
a different way to learn, and but
Yep.
the learning is what's important. It doesn't matter how
Yes.
you do it. It's just that you do it.
Yes. Yeah, I think there I'm gonna mangle the quote, but there's something that Einstein said, where he said something along the lines of, I don't consider myself as possessing any particular intelligence. I am just insatiably curious.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the thing. It's like, I mean, I learned a lot from my dad. My dad had an eighth grade education. He dropped out of school to help take care of the farm during World War II and never went back, because at his time and place, you didn't have to. But I learned more about the world from him than really anybody else in my life because he was so curious about things. And my parents were very much. My hometown had what had been one of the first Carnegie libraries back when billionaires opened libraries with their money. And if you didn't know something because there was no internet, you go to the library and you figure it out. which also means that when people say, I wonder why X, I'm like, I can tell you. Oh, you want to talk about the Black Plague for 30 minutes? I can do that.
But
Um, I'm fun at parties. But that has, having that modeled for me and that, asking questions was like, that's what we're meant to do.
yeah.
And then we're meant to go try and find out the answer. And some things you just have to like let the mystery be. But there's also a lot in the world that you can find out. And I love, as a systems thinker, I want to get under the hood and take things apart and figure out how they work.
Yeah.
And that includes myself and the systems that surround me, and always finding new places where I didn't know that I was enmeshed in this bigger context, and then having to make the decision about what my relationship with that was going to be.
That is such a really good, succinct way of describing that. I'm taking a course right now on family systems and
Ooh.
which is deep and heavy.
Oh yeah.
Again, not a mental health professional or a physician of any, in any regard, but if you're going to broach that topic, I absolutely suggest making sure that you check in with yourself and also getting a professional to help you wherever possible, because you can do all the shadow work and family systems work in the world, but sometimes it brings up heavy stuff that you don't
Yeah.
anticipate because they're so, again, deeply embedded within us. And
Was
it's so in the parts therapy too. Like, there's so many new wonderful things.
so much. I love internal family systems. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorite things. But I was actually talking to someone recently, a friend of mine, and they were like, well, I want to know where I should begin shadow work. And I was like, you go get a therapist.
Yes.
And they were like, and I was like, don't, and if there's any of these folks listening, I'm sorry, but don't hire an intuitive shadow work coach who also doesn't have a bunch of letters after their name. Don't try to do this alone out of a book.
Don't only hire them.
Don't only
Take
hire them.
piece. Yeah,
Yeah, you
absolutely.
can. You absolutely
Yeah.
you can get a lot from those folks. But because shadow work is now like kind of a buzzword, there's also a whole lot of people out there who might have good things to say, but I think are not prepared when you get in deep. I'm like,
No.
you start with a therapist because
Yes.
you need to surface those things. And I know that therapy is not accessible for everybody, and that is like such a social ill.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
but yeah, to just like dive in when you don't even know what you're going to face, like it can be really scary. And that doesn't mean that it's bad, but yeah, you have, witches use all the tools that are available to us.
Yes. Yep. That is a common theme with witches. And
Yeah.
you wrote a lovely paraphrase. You paraphrased Starhawk.
Oh
Shocking,
yes.
right? We love
Yes.
Starhawk. Starhawk, if you ever
Yes.
listen to my measly podcast, please, we love you.
We love her so much.
You shaped me. Yeah.
I keep saying that I want to be Starhawk when I grow up, but I'm kind of running out of time, I guess. So, I'm like, well, and if she would read my book, it would make me really happy.
I hear
Um,
that. I
you
also
know,
really love Selena Fox. I say that too. I'm like, I want to be Starhawk, Selena Fox, any
oh,
of my mentors, like my
yes.
personal mentors and the ones that I've only read in books, for sure.
Selena's one of my favorite people. We did a bunch of work together in the early aughts when my at my university where I was doing my graduate work, we were trying to form the first pagan association at any Methodist affiliated university, which is a thing.
That's an
Um,
undertaking though,
it was an
right?
undertaking, and
Oof.
we did it. It took us 2.5 years, but
Wow.
I don't know if they're still thriving because student orgs do what they do. But we had to have like basically like our denomination had to sponsor us, and people couldn't get behind the idea that that's not a thing that we do.
Yeah.
And so in talking to Selena, she's like, you know what, Circle Sanctuary will do it.
Oh, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, it was great.
So many people that I want to meet and aspire to be like and that inspire me.
Yes, she's
But
so fun.
I would love to meet Star. That's awesome. I'm jealous. Super
Yes.
jealous right now.
I'm very lucky that I got to meet Margot Adler before she passed.
Did you
Yes,
really?
and she laughed at my favorite pagan joke,
Oh,
which is
can you share
I
that?
can, it's clean. That that you're a pagan if you've ever won an argument by citing Drawing Down the Moon, knowing damn well and good the other person hadn't read it either.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's phenomenal. Oh my gosh, we're going off
Yeah.
on 10 tangents, but
Yes,
we'll still
yes.
we'll swing into the station about what I was about to bring up, but I don't
Right.
care.
Absolutely.
This
Well,
is so
you,
delightful.
you can edit out the outtakes for people who want the blooper reel.
Yeah, I think this is so important right now. I think this is a very timely conversation to have on Solstice Eve, right? I mean, this is a
Yes.
very powerful time. And
Yes.
what better way to honor feminism than to use our true voices and
Yes.
really parrot our ideals.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you did say Margot Adler, and Drawing Down the Moon was the first. It was the first pagan book I found. I was like, oh my gosh, I think I was like 7 years old in the local library. I know, but I was in the anthropology section because I told you about the sister that was
Yeah.
older than me,
Yeah.
and so I was
Yeah.
in like the library, and I happened to sneak that onto my book pile because being raised in the 80s, we were left to our own devices quite a bit, 70s and 80s
Radically
maybe.
unparented to the point of neglect, some of us.
Which
Yes.
I am grateful for personally,
Yeah,
because
me
otherwise
too.
I
Me
would have
too.
never been exploring the parts of the
Yeah.
library that my Catholic
Oh,
parents would have been like, no, 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 no.
no.
So, but yeah, that was one of the very first ones.
Oh,
Because yeah, I'm like, do I have a copy? I probably do. I keep giving it away to my students, but it's required reading in some of the initiatory traditions
yeah.
I'm in,
Oh,
which I
for sure.
appreciate.
It should be.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, just really wonderful people, and but you paraphrased Starhawk. You
Yes.
said that witches don't necessarily believe in the goddess, but we experience her.
Yes.
And
Yes.
bringing that within to feminist witchcraft, I like how you do say you don't have to believe in the goddess to practice the craft, which I agree. Um, but it is part of your own belief system.
Yes.
I like how
Yes.
you bring that up.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think the thing that I found, and in talking to other folks within, I think contemporary paganism generally, but witchcraft traditions, more specifically, and feminist craft specifically, is that one of the reasons it's so healing is that it brings us back to our bodies, which have been, for a lot of us, the sites of a lot of violence and of the wounding of patriarchy. Now that doesn't always mean it's easy because the body's not always a safe place. But to learn to kind of be in your body, and I'm somebody who lived a lot of the first 19 years of my life in my head because being smart was what I did. And to get back into the body and not think of it as either something to be ignored or something to be like shaped and whittled down and overcome. I think that that can be a catalyst for healing so much of what patriarchy does to us.
Yes.
And I imagine that it's true for people who aren't women too. I can only speak from my experience as somebody who went through that process as a cisgender woman. But my experiences in feminist craft like fundamentally shifted my relationship to my body when I started to really work on the idea that like I was, whether I believe there was like some woman in the sky, I don't know, but I was the embodiment of this thing that I felt
Yeah.
when I went into the woods and when I was with animals and plants and when I started doing circle with people. And I'm like, I know I feel something, and I'm not anything I ever felt in church. So I know that there's something there, and like I feel it in my body, which means that like it's in there.
Yeah.
And that that was just such a fundamental shift. And I have as much stuff around my body as any woman that's raised in a society does. It was at least the beginning of a journey of not letting society continue to weaponize my body against me. Because I am a woman of size. I am tall and curvy, and for my part of the country was not the mainstream blonde-haired, blue-eyed Nordic attractive. All of these things. Um, and those things had been used to hurt me because I was insecure about them. And while I'm always going to have my work to do about it, that idea that there was a sacredness that I embody, that you embody, that everybody embodies, changed my relationship to my body and changed my relationship to other people.
Yes. Yeah. The reflection of the divine spark,
Yeah.
or whatever you believe.
Yeah. I'm
Whatever
like, I'm
you
like,
believe.
I'm like, if it's in, because I talk about in the book that, I think one of the things that about reclaiming goddess language, whether you are a theist or not, is that one of the greatest acts of violence is to look at a group of people and say, well, there's nothing about God in you. There's nothing sacred in you. And I don't think using masculine language for God has to do that, but damn, is it used to do it a lot,
It
right?
really is.
I always say anybody who says that pronouns don't matter, refer to God as she
Yeah.
in front of some
Yeah.
people and watch them freak out, right? To sort of claim that and recognize that there's inherent divinity in all of us, or an inherent sacredness, if you would prefer to use
Yep.
non-theological language. Knowing that we can tap into that, I think that's just such the mind body split. I want to travel back in time, meet Rene Descartes in a bar and punch him
Ooh.
in the face. Because dude, like you realize this is kind of all your fault, right? To kind of get over that and get the body and the mind and the spirit all talking to each other again. It gives us access to start doing so much healing, seeing the sacred out there walking around in the world.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes they look like me and sometimes they don't. But I like to think there are times that people see me and like that's what they see too. And walking in that knowledge just makes you, I think it stands a little taller and makes you more willing to, instead of thinking of yourself as just a fundamentally broken sort of bag of flesh, as, something that's sacred and worth kind of building a temple to. It's just such a shift.
Oh, it's a shift, it's a reclaiming,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
It's so
I
beautiful.
I love how you talk about why center the goddess within your practice. And this is your own personal belief
Yeah.
system, which is beautiful. But you did reference, does this replicate the same erasure that, some of us are critiquing?
Yes. Yes.
Don't we need both to have a balanced view? And thinking about, I love to think about the duality of, if you
Mhm.
go back really far, let's go back to like ancient Egypt, the old kingdom. So let's talk about Heka, for example. Most of the old, like the Sumerian, Egyptian, in any pantheon, you go back further, the less important gender becomes.
Mhm.
It's an easier way to look at it. I always use Heka as an example because it's what the divine or the magic force within
Mhm.
God,
Mhm.
and then of course
Mhm.
reflected within us, because
Yep.
that's what many of us believe. So it's the magical force, and Heka, both male and
Yep.
female, or not even labeled as male and female in some cases.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. Well, gender binary exists in plenty of cultures.
yep,
The rigid binary that is enforced in a lot of Western culture is pretty new,
it is.
right? It's a fairly recent invention. I think, sometimes it's just sort of the limits of the language, that we have to think about, things come to us in those binary language because it's a fundamental way that like Western industrial society is organized. And I had questions too, like about, because I very much, I'm not a separatist unless, as Alice Walker says, occasionally for health. But are we replicating this? And I definitely would have been in circles where it's just basically they've replicated like the big bad god of Abrahamic faith, but given her pronouns.
Yep.
And I'm like, no, I don't want that kind of like abusive parent relationship. I think something that was said to me as I was sort of working this out, as much as I like found goddess imagery and language really empowering, I then also wanted to think about this other thing. In unpacking it, I realized that like one of the things that was going on for me was that I was raised Church of Christ, where they say there is one God, there is one truth, right? And that was something I had to root out, that by centering goddess in my practice, I'm not saying all that other stuff, all those other forms of the divine don't exist.
Right.
They're out there. And maybe someday I'll open my door and they'll come in. You know, I've been in circles where people invoked masculine or, male gods. And I didn't run screaming, it was okay. And so I think to realize that it's not exclusionary,
Yes.
or it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't
It's
have to
just
be
to
exclusionary.
focus,
Yes.
in the same way that, like, okay, if you work with Thor, and Thor's your guy, most of the folks I know who work with Thor are not saying that the other gods don't exist.
Yep.
He's just your guy. And I think that that's really key, but I think it can get really difficult. And much in the same way that people are like, oh, it's a feminist space, it means it's excluding men. It's like, no, it's centering women, or centering women. But it's hard to get out of that. Like, I mean, Levi Strauss called it binary opposition, right? That there can either be one or the other. But I mean, like we've mentioned, like multiple things can be true.
Yes.
And that's can be very threatening to kind of the Western worldview, but we're kind of unusual
Yeah.
in that, and I think that rigid binary thinking can be seen elsewhere in the world so much because of colonialism, not
Mhm.
because that's sort of indigenous to people's ways of thinking, and to like be able to pull that apart and like stand in the both and of it all
Yeah.
is it's one of my favorite parts of being a witch, but man, it makes the world a lot more complicated. Some feminist spirituality, it can feel exclusionary.
It can be, and in some cases, it really is
Yeah,
exclusionary. And I hate that. That breaks my
yeah,
heart.
yeah.
I think that this whole perspective of a reclaiming, of unpacking where these splits and these chasms came from. Why do we need to feel the need to exclude? Why do we need to feel superior for
Yeah.
some like weird arbitrary thing that we're fed as a child and something that's fear-based? I'm
Yes,
glad that there are people that are stepping out of that, and I think
me
that's
too.
largely our job to move
Yes,
forward and to
yes.
just end all of that.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I had not thought as deeply as I probably should have about trans exclusion in goddess spirituality spaces, because I now know that I encountered it, but encountered it in this like soft way, right? Where they, use coded language, and that to make sure that there's only cisgender women in these spaces, and not every goddess spirituality space is like that. Be very clear. But I mean, you don't notice what's not there if you don't know you're looking for it, right? And there was a goddess festival that I had been to a few times in Texas, and it was women that I'd known since I was, just very new on this path. Nobody in that first ritual I was at, I want to say they're all fabulous gender expansive allies, but um and I went a couple times and I got a lot out of it. It was just like, oh, beautiful, right? I took friends. And then there was one year where there was this sort of blow up on social media, and I was like, what is happening? And what had happened was there was a woman in our community who had been part of that festival. She had helped plan it. She had done workshops. She had, been in community with these women for years. And she finally felt sort of safe enough and vulnerable enough to disclose to one person that she was somebody who, as she put it, she's like, I was born intersex, the way I think about it. I feel like I was born with a birth defect, which I had corrected as soon as I could. But she was not assigned female at birth. Um, and then that person that she just close to others. And they called her in and said, you understand that you can't come back, right? And she was somebody who had chosen to pursue medical gender affirmation. So literally, if she had not told them, they would never have known this about her. I don't think your genitals determine whether you're a man or woman anyway,
Right.
but like literally, she never had to tell them. But she did, because she is an authentic person and she shares her story, and she felt brave and safe. And these women had done circle with her for years. And because of an accident of her birth, she was kicked out of that community. And
Oh,
it
that's
broke
terrible.
my heart. I went in and I tried to like fight and move the needle. was like, I want to change this. I know there are people in this community who want to change it. And the women that were the organizers, they pulled a Michigan Women's Festival, which was like, well, if you're going to make us change it, we're just going to shut it all down.
That's
It,
awful.
it was awful. And I was like, I just can't. Like, I went 7 rounds over instant message. And
Yeah.
I was like, if you want to know, like, so the opening ritual of that event was always they lined women up from oldest to youngest, right? And it was this very moving ritual. But I'm like, every year we talk about why there's a few women in their 80s, a chunk of women in their 70s, an assload in their 50s and 60s, some in their 40s, and a vanishing few younger than that. And most of the ones that are younger than that are the daughters of women further up the line. I was like, and have you ever wondered why that is? Because a lot of young women, especially young women with progressive ideals, are not going to go someplace where their trans friends can't go.
Yes.
And these were people living in what they would absolutely tell you is the most progressive city in Texas, and probably one of the 5 most progressive cities in the US. And this was so deeply entrenched. And I couldn't, I stayed long enough to make a stand. And then I realized that they weren't ever going to move. And I did not go out and found my own festival. Maybe that's coming. But, I was like, fine, I'm going to go do this differently. But it broke my heart. Those,
Yeah.
those women had been so important to me. And I had these like formative experiences with them and at that festival, and I'd learned a lot. And it was like going home for 5 days every fall. And I was like, if I stick around knowing that this is never going to change, I am complicit in what happened to her.
That's true. That is true.
And I was like, I can't just go on my little camping trip twice a year and pretend it doesn't bother me.
Yes.
And that really, like, I'd been thinking about sort of the issue of exclusionary feminist spirituality spaces, like, increasingly. But that was just a line in the sand. And I cried, and then I got up and said, okay, what do we do?
And I hope, and not to pry, but I hope
Yeah.
that you communicated
Oh, yeah.
why that was something that you had to leave behind.
Yeah. I did. I told them exactly why.
Good.
Um, and, they kind of tried to pitch it as generational. And I said, well, first of all, like, I know a whole lot of goddess women who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who don't think like this.
Yeah.
And also, you've been telling me that I'm too young to know anything since I was 19 and you were my age.
Yes.
So now I'm your
When do I
age.
get to be
Yeah. It's like
old enough?
it's almost like it's not about the number of times I go around the sun. But like I
Yeah.
don't see that spaces like that are going to be able to survive long term, especially those that aren't under the name of like a big name like celebrity pagan.
Well, I agree with that. I think having to adapt, and when you know better, you do better.
Yes. Yes.
Having to adapt and kind of change with the times. If there's something that you're not comfortable with, that's different than completely vilifying it.
Yep.
I still don't think it's okay, but let's
No.
unpack that. Like, why do you feel this way? Where does this come from? Let's talk about it.
Yes.
Being
Yes.
able to have those hard conversations is so important.
Yes, it is. And I was always kind of like, look, like what you do in your own living room with your own coven, I don't get to say anything about it.
Sure.
I'm not going to be like, if you do not already have a non-binary person in your circle, one will be assigned to you. Like,
Yeah.
do what you're going to do. But when you say that you're bringing this out here for the people and that you care about women,
Yeah.
then that means at the very least you care about both cis and trans women.
Yes.
Because I think when I often talk about it in terms of, I talk about women. I'm also, and my spaces are also welcoming and I hope affirming of non-binary folks who sort of find their homes in spaces that center those experiences. I also don't think people should treat non-binary folks as though they're like women light. That's the thing that happens sometimes too. But I think about like people who have like real embodied experiences of misogyny. We got to stick together. And I mean, misogyny and patriarchy hurts everybody, no matter what your gender. but there
Yes.
are certain people that are targeted by it and experience it, some of us from the minute we're born, some of us not. And that if you're telling me that you care about women's issues, to me, it means you care about the damage of misogyny. And clearly that is
Yes.
not what that meant to these women.
Yes.
It did. I cried. It was so hard. And then I just had this revelation that I was like, but they don't get to take my craft from me. And they don't get to
No.
take my goddess from me. And they don't get to have this. And if somebody isn't out there writing about this and talking against this, they'll take it.
Yes.
They will make it their own. And now I wasn't at the time, and I'm not now the only voice out there talking about it, but I was like, if somebody doesn't, then they get to set the terms of this debate. And it's not a debate, but they get to set the terms of this. And we're not doing that.
No. No. The time it's done.
It's done.
It's there's always an upheaval before a big change, and I just I'm clinging to that. That's what I'm
Yes.
clinging to right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
our turn
It's
to flip over the tables.
exactly like we are. Like I had somebody talk about, like, in general what's happening in the country, with the people that are in charge right now. That what we're experiencing is an extinction event,
Yeah.
which is where an animal fights its hardest when it knows it's not going to survive.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it means it does a lot of damage to everything around it.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
But there are ways to, like, protect the people that are the most vulnerable. And I can't remember who said it, but I saw a quote somewhere that said, if you're not getting hit by the stones being thrown at people you care about, you are not standing close enough. And I think about that a lot. That, like, I'm white, mostly able-bodied, cisgendered woman of a certain age with a certain amount of economic privilege. But the things that are happening to the more vulnerable people around me, they don't have to happen to me for me to care about them, because it's all connected.
Yes. Yes.
It's all connected. It's also like, I might not be high on the list, but I am on the list.
Yep.
So why
Hey.
don't why,
Yeah.
why don't we fight this now instead of waiting? And it's a lot of work, but that's magic too. Getting in the way I think that's one of the things witches do best, is we get in the way.
I love I love that perspective, and I share that myself. The rest of this book is fantastic. You go into how to build a practice, but it is a fantastic book.
Thank you. I
It
had
really
so much
made
fun
me
writing it.
think. Really
I
made
had
me
so
think.
much fun writing it. And it took me maybe longer than it should have, but I feel like it came to the world at just the right time.
Oh, I agree with
Um,
that.
yeah, I remember when my author's copies came here a couple weeks ago. Now I'm just like, oh my God, she's here.
There she is.
There she
Yeah,
is. I did the thing.
you
Uh,
did. And not
and
only that, you can tell that your passion shines through. You can tell that you had fun writing it. But I have had so much fun looking into you and your
Thank you.
beliefs. And this has been one heck of a conversation. I think I could
Yes.
talk to you for a week.
Yeah, I
This
think we
is,
should. I think we have to be friends now.
oh yeah. Oh, without absolutely. Sorry, but I'm a Capricorn. I'm going to collect you.
Oh
That's
yeah, and I'm a Sag, so I like to be connected.
Yeah,
I like to be
see?
collected. Like,
That's what we do. It's
yes,
perfect.
yes,
Kismet.
yes. I love it. Well, and I'm happy to come on again anytime. Like, I'm always doing something.
Yay. Yes,
So,
absolutely. Oh,
uh,
this will not be our last conversation.
no,
And
no.
hopefully not our last on this podcast for
Oh,
sure.
no, for sure, for sure. No, you're stuck with
Yeah.
me now. So,
Yep.
I
You
I
know,
did I did find the piece.
I want to hear this piece, this work.
Okay. So, I wrote this for the Interfaith Pride Service in Ames, Iowa in 2024. And it's called A God Who Looks Like Me, or Everything I Know About God I Learned from Queer Women. The first time I saw God up close, she was fussing over a pot of vegetarian chili in the tiny kitchen of a bungalow in Denton, Texas. I remember turning the corner from the living room full of women in bright skirts and scarves, laughing over one inside joke or another, and seeing her there at the stove in her broomstick skirt and her long, curly red and gray hair, with a wooden spoon in her hand like a magic wand or maybe a weapon. I remember my breath caught for a moment, and I felt momentarily in the presence of something beyond myself. And then it passed, and she went back to stirring the chili, and I stood for a moment while my entire world shifted 180 degrees. It was the spring equinox, or close enough, and we were gathered in a friend's home to mark the turning of the seasons. I'd wandered into what we at the time called women's spirituality after fleeing the misogyny of the church of my youth. I had figured out that I was queer mere months before. I was lucky enough to leave my childhood church before that so that I escaped the damage done by homophobia, and I was still figuring out how I felt about that. I was developing a feminist consciousness, which included naming what had happened to me in the church for what it was, and I was still angry about that. Well, I didn't have the language at the time. I knew deep down that it had been wrong, deeply wrong, for the men who spoke from the pulpit to tell women and girls like me that we had nothing sacred in us, that our job was to be helpmeets and willing servants, but that just by being born into this world as we were, we would always be less than. So when I found myself almost by accident among women who were honoring the divine feminine in the earth and who believed with their entire beings, not only that God was a woman, but that every single woman holds God within herself, my entire spirit breathed a sigh of relief. These circles of women, most of them queer and all of them feminists, taught me everything I know about God and how to be in her presence. They taught me that the voice of God sounds like women laughing sleepily together in the early morning as they wake up from a night camping under the stars. They taught me that God is found in love between women, whether romantic, platonic, or sexual, and that we're all entitled to that love. They taught me to take note of the cycles of the moon and the seasons and to celebrate the magic in all of it. They taught me that my body is sacred, just as it is at any given moment, and that it is anything but a lesser vessel. They taught me that sometimes you need to go outside and look at the moon and the stars, and somehow hard things don't seem so hard. They taught me that the way I love and who I love is wholly sacred and a gift from the divine, and that no one has the right to say otherwise. They taught me to pay exquisite attention. They taught me that life is too short to stay in bad relationships or drink bad coffee. They taught me that lavender oil is great for a scrape, but you need antibiotics for an infection. They taught me that women can change the world simply by being ourselves. They taught me that you don't need a man around to open the pickle jar or build the bookshelves. They taught me that you cannot wait for the moment you're not scared to make your move, but that sometimes you just have to do it scared instead. They taught me that living your authentic self is hard and it can cost you, but it's nothing compared to what you lose when you don't. They taught me to make a mean vegetarian chili. Feminist writer Patricia Ann Riley says, "Our search for a God who looks like us begins in our own lives. She will be found there." Queer goddess women taught me to stop looking outside myself for God, but to see her in myself. They taught me that God looks like me, and that God loves like me, and that God looks like all of us and loves like all of us and is in all of us. And finally, they taught me that I didn't actually have to learn any of that. I simply needed to remember.
Oh my gosh, Susan. What is this moisture leaking out of my eyes? You've officially made the Capricorn weep. That's not cool. That is
Achievement unlocked.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
That is profoundly beautiful.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for
Oh,
sharing that.
of course.
Thank you for coming on and for sharing your book with us. I hope
Yes.
that everybody goes and buys this book. I can't recommend it enough.
Yes.
And
If you can't buy it, get your local library to stock it.
get your local library to stock it. Yes. Just thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
so
coming
much.
on.
This was so much fun.
It was so much
Oh,
fun.
well, do you ever come to Minneapolis for PaganaCon?
Uh, no, but I've heard of Paganacan and I can fly,
I think
you
you might need
know.
to come. Yeah, maybe we can room with Ness.
Oh
But
my gosh, yes, yes. Earlier when we were talking, I hope you're listening, Ness. Earlier when we were talking, I was talking about how I had the privilege of rooming with Ness at the Sacred Space Conference in Maryland here just a few months ago, and how much fun it was. How fun would it be to get everybody together?
oh my
Yeah.
goodness, yeah, I'm hoping to do a book signing up there, so I've got to put in my program request now that it's open. But
Nice.
it's it's good. I'm trying to get out to some more conferences, so We'll make it happen. We can
We
make some
will.
good trouble.
Something will shift and align and it will happen.
Yes. No,
Thank
yeah,
you.
absolutely. This was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. It was lovely to meet you.
Thank you.